Good day, everyone. This is Zargwarte from BS Ed English 3E, and I'm going to discuss about the final topic of Chapter 3, Language of Literature, Language as Development and Social Construct. So I will divide this topic into two parts. First is the language of literature as development, and language as a social construct. Language of literature as development. The study of literature acquired eminence during the Romantic period when the Romantic poets such as Wordsworth and Coleridge asserted that the imaginative truths expressed by literature were superior to those discovered by scientists, historians, and other scholars, which is, literature is beginning to be viewed as an appropriate vehicle for language learning and development since the focus is now on authentic language and authentic situations. Literature was seen as a body of knowledge which ought to be learned for its own sake. Thus, the process of creativity and the entire body of literature were given an honored and elevated status that sustained the elitist nature which the study of literature had already acquired. In examining traditional approaches to literature, what is apparent is the prevailing views amongst the elite were continually emulated by educationists, possibly preventing a clearly defined role of literature teaching in education. So most of these views remained as propaganda and failed to motivate a reasoned set of proposals as to how a literature course could be designed. The ultimate purpose of literary criticism can be defined as interpretation and evaluation of literary writings as works of art, and the major concern of the critic is to explicate the individual message of the writer in terms of which make it clear to others. However, this is a difficult process to implement without a sufficiently explicit and pedagogically oriented definition of the nature of literature study as a subject. A consistent assertion that literature illuminates the mind with no specific aims in terms of objectives only serve to make literature an unpopular subject. Moreover, changes began to happen in the 60s and 70s. And now let us proceed to the relationship between language and literature. It is difficult to supply a watertight definition of the term literature, but what can be asserted is that literature is not the name of a simple, straightforward phenomenon, but an umbrella term which covers a wide range of activities. However, when it becomes a subject of study, it may be seen as an activity involving and using language. Using literature in the language classroom. Using literature in the language classroom is a concept that has its focal point in language development. Thus, any syllabus based on this concept should also maintain language as the central concern. For this, it is imperative that curriculum developers depart from the traditional view attached to literature. It is also equally important that the syllabus has suggestions for teaching strategies and forms of assessment. The objectives may outline the importance of literature towards language development, but they become redundant if the teaching and assessment techniques do not apply those objectives practically. Literature generates creativity in language and imagination and should feature in any education system that regards discovery and enjoyment as essential components of the learning process. The claim the study of literature is fundamentally a study of language and operation by Widdowson 1971 is based on the realization that literature is an example of language in use and is a context for language use. Thus, studying the language of literary text as language in operation is seen as enhancing the learner's appreciation of aspects of the different systems of language organization. And now let us proceed to our final topic, language as social construct. Examining the social constructionism of language leads us to the questions, what is language and how does language work? So to systematically answer these questions, we are guided by the following thesis. The primary function of language is communication rather than representation, so language is essentially a social phenomenon. Language has at least two functions, public communication and expression of thought. So almost nobody denies this, but about the question which is the primary function of language, different scholars have different opinions. For example, Chomsky seriously regards expression of thought as the primary function of language. I take communication as the primary function of language. The two different conceptions of language will lead to very different theoretic consequences. Since thinking is firstly and mainly personal business, Chomsky emphasizes that language is the innate competence of individuals with a genetic foundation and other characteristics such as universality and autonomy. Communication must be done in a society and leads to cooperation or coordination. So it is a social phenomenon controlled by the collective intentionality of a linguistic community. The emergence of language is due to human beings' need to communicate and cooperate. Human beings are weaker than some other kinds of animal. In order to defend or attack from other animals and to obtain food or shelter, they must live together, work together, and so on. So they need to talk with each other, to express their feelings, to pass on their ideas to their companions. By means of linguistic communication, they can coordinate individuals' behaviors and actions and transfer the accumulated experience of life to the next generation. This is why language creates societies. We interact and communicate that leads to social construction. And that ends my presentation for today. Thank you, and I hope you learned something.